Hello, this is Mr. Mosier, 8th grade U.S. history teacher. This is a presentation looking at immigration today. The purpose of this presentation is not to provide you detailed information of immigration policy, immigration law, or the process of immigration to the U.S. today. This is more or less to give you an overview of how immigration currently works. For more information about the immigration laws and policies and procedures, please visit the Department of Homeland Security's website, which you see here on the screen. Look under the topics for immigration and naturalization, and they'll give you some more additional details about how immigration works in the United States today. Immigration by the numbers. 2012, the U.S. admitted about 1,031,631 immigrants that are known as legal permanent residents, which means that they have permission to live and work in the U.S. for a period of time, an extended period of time. As of January 2012, it's estimated about 13.3 million legal permanent residents live in the United States. That's out of a population of over 300 million. So it's a percentage of the overall population in the U.S. And we don't know the number of illegal or undocumented workers in the U.S. with any great certainty. Best estimations are there's about 11 million illegal immigrants living in the U.S. Those are people that have not gone through this process, and typically where the controversy with immigration, at least within our modern history, has been dealing with the last couple of years. Some basic terms to be aware of. Immigrant, those are people who are moving from one country to live in another. A passport, that is a document that gives you permission as a citizen of your country to go visit and travel other nations around the world. It shows that you are a citizen and gives you permission to come back into the country when you fly back in. And then, of course, a visa, which you see a picture of there, is a document from a country that gives you permission to live and work in that country for an extended period of time. So it's not the same thing as a passport. It basically says you have permission to live and work in the country that you are immigrating into, which we'll talk about here today. What are the three basic categories that are kind of set up for different groups of immigrants? And so we're going to be looking at these three major categories, and each one has its own little set of preferences and kind of how it works. Again, the purpose of this presentation is not to give you a detailed rundown of immigration law. Immigration law is determined by laws passed by the U.S. Congress, signed into law by the U.S. President, enforced by the Department of Homeland Security, which falls under the power of the President, the executive branch. So these are more generalities in terms of immigration categories. So let's talk about the first one here, family-sponsored immigrants. Family-sponsored immigrants are basically immigrants of family members, fathers and mothers, who are currently living in the United States that sponsor them to come as immigrants. So, for example, it could be sons and daughters that are not married of current American citizens. They could be spouses or children that aren't married of a lawful permanent resident that can also come in. So, for example, let's say that I maybe immigrated a year ago as an immigrant, and now I'd like my wife and my children to come with me. I can sponsor them as a legal permanent resident. If I have a visa from the U.S. to live and work in the U.S., I can get a visa for my family too. Married sons and daughters of U.S. citizens can also come into the U.S. under the sponsorship. Brothers and sisters of U.S. citizens. Basically, I know as an immigrant, I have a family member who lives in the United States, and they're going to sponsor me and my claim, my process to go through and become an American citizen and become an immigrant. And so family-sponsored immigration is one of those that are used. The second most common category for immigration is what's called employment-based immigrants. These are quote-unquote priority workers. These are people that are in high need and high demand in the U.S. workforce. They can include things like researchers and professors at universities, executives and managers on multinational corporations. There's a lot of companies that do business in places around the world. They have offices in Hong Kong, they have offices in New York, offices in London, and so oftentimes these managers who work in these big companies that are multinational companies sometimes will need to work in the U.S. for a time period, so they can apply for a visa and get a work permit to live and work in the U.S. Oftentimes these are professionals with pretty high advanced degrees, usually college degrees like bachelor degrees or master's degrees or doctoral degrees. They could be skilled workers or in specialty professions that there's a need for those workers. They could be special immigrants, such as ministers of a religion, medical graduates, etc. Investors can sometimes come in and serve as these employment-based immigrants. Generally, these are immigrants who have an important job to fill in American society, in the American workforce, and so they can apply for a permanent resident standing, a visa standing, to come and work in the U.S. The third category are what are known as diversity immigrants. And that can be up to be about 55,000 visas every year that promotes immigration from countries that are really not major sources of immigration today. And the reason behind this type of immigration is really to promote dialogue and understanding with people of other countries from around the world, to give us a better sense of a better understanding of the world community. What I mean by that is we want people to come live and work in the United States, to understand what we as Americans are like. A lot of people that live in other nations know us only from the movies and TV and music that they watch, which does give a very distorted view of what the average American's lifestyle is like. Not everybody lives in Beverly Hills. Not everybody is a rap star. So we want to promote this dialogue and better understanding through immigration. And so the federal government targets areas like Africa and Asia, places in Europe, North America, South America, Central America, the Caribbean, Oceania, which is the islands in the Pacific Ocean around Australia and such. And the idea here is promoting better understanding, promoting dialogue. And so we want immigrants from other countries who may not know us very well, who may not typically come to the country as an immigrant. We encourage that group of immigration to come in, and immigrants to come in to live in the U.S., work in the U.S., better understand what we as a country is like, and that way if they do choose to go back to their home country, they maybe will leave with a better understanding that they can share with their community of what America is all about. And so it's really to help promote this idea of dialogue. Another category of immigrants that come pretty frequently are refugees. Refugees are people that are fleeing their home country because of some kind of catastrophe, whether it's a natural disaster or whether it's violence like a civil war or some kind of internal conflict. That number is determined by the president with consultation with the U.S. Congress on how much refugees are allowed in. In 1997, they allowed in about 78,000 people as refugees. That really determines on what's going on in current events and world affairs at this moment in time. So if there's a major natural disaster, a major civil war happening in a country, the U.S. may take on refugees and allow them permission to come and live and work in the U.S. And if their country is settled back down and it's calmed down over there, they might end up going back there. They may choose to become American citizens after living here too, and that's definitely an option as well. But refugees is kind of our way of good nature faith to bring people in who are struggling, who need help. Their country is in turmoil, and we're going to be a good neighbor and let them come in and get some assistance. So as a permanent resident, as an immigrant, what do you have the right to do? Well, really, it's not too different than the average American citizen. You can live and work anywhere in the U.S. You can apply for U.S. citizenship when you're eligible, and we'll talk about some of those requirements here in just a little bit. You can request a visa for your husband or wife or your children, if they're not married, to come and work with you. You can get a Social Security benefits. You can get supplemental security income, like Medicaid benefits. These are all social safety nets that we have today for people who need assistance from the government. And again, as a immigrant, as a permanent resident, you have the right to apply if you're eligible for these resources. You can own property in the U.S., so you can buy a house, you can buy a car. You can apply for a driver's license in the state or territory that you live in. You can leave and come back under certain conditions. So you can go back home and visit family members if you need to, and then come back and still be okay as a permanent resident. You can go to school, public school, you can go to college. You can join the armed forces. You can be in the Army, you can be in the Navy, you can be in the Marine Corps. You can also own a firearm if there are no laws in your state or local area that says you can't do that. So really, as an immigrant, as a permanent resident, you pretty much have the same rights as the average American citizen. As a permanent resident, you also have a responsibility to obey all federal, state, and local laws, just like an American citizen does. So no difference there. As a permanent resident, you have to pay federal, state, and local income taxes, just like American citizens have to do as well. As an American citizen, you have to register for selective services as a male on your 18th birthday. So do immigrants. So if you're a male immigrant at the age of 18, you have to apply for selective services. That's for the draft. So if there's ever a call of armed conflict and they need to conscript men into combat, there's a draft that's issued. The last time we had a draft wasn't since the 1970s in the Vietnam War, but that's part of the responsibility of an American citizen male and an immigrant male, 18 years to 26. You have to apply for selective services. As a permanent resident, an immigrant, you have to maintain your immigration status. You have to carry proof of your permanent resident status at all times, and I'll show you what that looks like here in just a little bit. And if you move, you have to let the Department of Homeland Security know within 10 days of your move. So if you move from town to town or apartment to apartment, you always have to update the Department of Homeland Security of your movements, which is a little bit different than what citizens generally have to do. So the proof that residents carry with them is something called a green card, and this is what one kind of looks like. They're basically like a driver's license. It's expected for permanent residents to carry these with them at all times. It basically has information on there about who you are and information about your status as an immigrant. Once you've lived in the U.S. as an immigrant, you can eventually become a citizen. So if you don't want to be an immigrant any longer, but you want to become a full-fledged American citizen and become part of this country, what's the process? And we call that naturalization. Naturalization is that process of where you change yourself from an immigrant to a full-fledged American citizen. The rules for that is, as of right now, that you have to live in the U.S. For at least 5 years, 3 years if you are currently married to an American citizen. You have to be present in the U.S. for a very specific time period. So you can't be out of the country like 90% of the time and only be in the U.S. like 10% of the time. You have to live within certain time frames and time parameters in order to apply for citizenship. So you can't be out of the country for a long period of time and apply for citizenship. You have to spend specific amounts of time in your state or district. Again, this time is about building a record of your performance at where you live. They want a record of how you are paying your taxes, are you obeying the laws. They don't want you moving around a lot to try to apply for citizenship. They want to get a good record of your performance as an immigrant to make sure that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. You have to behave in all legal and acceptable manners, and you have to know English and information about the U.S. history and government, which is called the American Citizenship Test, which we'll be taking in class. Hopefully you'll be able to pass, but there are questions about history and about government that immigrants are expected to know before becoming an American citizen. And once they've gone through this process, then they are sworn in at a naturalization ceremony, and then they become full-fledged American citizens. So this is kind of how immigration works today. We'll be doing some things in class, some games and some activities to kind of look at modern immigration to get a little bit of understanding of how this process works. As always, immigration is subject to laws passed by Congress and enforced by the Department of Homeland Security, which is controlled by the U.S. President. So this always varies based upon the current law that's being written and how it's being enforced by the Department of Homeland Security. So this is not set in stone, always subject to change. So have a wonderful day, everybody, and I'll talk to you all later.